Let me tell you something tonight that I wish someone had told me when I was 25 years old, broke, embarrassed, and standing on the doorstep of a farmer named Mr. Earl Schoaf who would change my life forever. I wish someone had grabbed me by the shoulders, looked me dead in the eyes, and said these words with enough conviction to shake the doubt right out of my bones. Keep on fighting, not just when it's convenient, not just when the odds are in your favor, not just when the wind is at your back and everybody around you is cheering your name. Keep on fighting when the night is long. Keep on fighting when the money runs out. Keep on fighting when the people you love the most look at you with that particular expression. You know the one. That quiet, polite, devastating expression that says they don't quite believe in you anymore. That is when you dig down deeper than you have ever dug before, and you find what you are truly made of. Now, I want you to understand something from the very beginning of this conversation tonight. Fighting is not about aggression. It's not about anger. It's not about proving something to someone who doubted you. Though I will admit, a little bit of that fuel isn't always a terrible thing. No, fighting as I mean it is about refusing to let the circumstances of your life become the conclusion of your story. Fighting is the daily discipline of continuing to move forward when every reasonable argument says you should stop. And let me tell you, life will make some very reasonable arguments. Life is an eloquent debater. Life will bring you evidence, statistics, past failures, present problems, and future uncertainties, and it will lay them all out before you like a lawyer making the case that you should give up. And your job, your absolute responsibility to yourself, is to rise every single morning and say, I hear your argument, I understand your evidence, and I reject your conclusion. That is what fighting means. Now, let me take you back to something that happened in my early years because I think the personal story is where the lesson breathes. I grew up in a small agricultural community in Idaho. We didn't have much. My father was a farmer. My mother was devoted, faithful, hardworking, the kind of woman who made something magnificent out of very little. And when I was a young man, I went out into the world with high hopes and absolutely no plan. I had the dream without the discipline. I had the ambition without the strategy. And for the first 25 years of my life, I accumulated almost nothing except debt and a growing sense that maybe the world had been designed for other people and I had somehow missed the registration deadline. And here's what I want you to understand about that period. I almost stopped fighting. I almost talked myself into settling. I came very close to deciding that where I was where I was going to stay. That the gap between where I stood and where I wanted to be was simply too wide to cross. And there are millions of people tonight, millions of them, who are standing in that exact same place I stood back then, right at the edge of giving up, right at that dangerous moment when the voice of doubt is louder than the voice of determination. And I want to speak to those people tonight. I want my words to find them wherever they are. Because what I discovered, what Mr. Schoaf helped me discover, is that the distance between where you are and where you want to be is not measured in miles or years or dollars. It is measured in decisions. And the most important decision you will ever make is the decision to keep going when everything inside you and everything outside you is voting for you to stop. Now let me talk about the nature of the battle because I think we need to be honest about what we're actually fighting against. Most people, when they think about fighting, they think about fighting their competitors, fighting the economy, fighting the critics, fighting the people who told them they couldn't do it. And yes, those battles are real, but the most consequential battle, the one that determines every other outcome, is the one happening between your ears. It is the internal war between the part of you that knows what you're capable of and the part of you that is terrified of finding out, between the person you have been and the person you have decided to become, between yesterday's habits and tomorrow's possibilities. That battle never ends. And I want you to understand that's not a discouraging statement. It's actually a liberating one. Because if the battle never ends, it means the opportunity never ends. Every morning you wake up, you get to fight again. Every morning the sun comes up, you get another chance to choose courage over comfort, discipline over laziness, persistence over surrender. The battlefield is reset. Your previous losses don't disqualify you. Your past mistakes don't determine your future outcome. All that matters is what you decide to do with today. And today is where the fighting happens, not someday, not when things get better, not when the kids are grown, not when the economy turns around, not when you feel ready, because I want to share something with you that I learned the hard way. Ready is a myth. There is no state of complete readiness that you achieve before you begin. Readiness is not a prerequisite for action. It's a byproduct of it. You don't get ready and then fight. You fight, and in the fighting, you become ready. The preparation and the battle are the same thing. They're happening simultaneously. And every person who ever accomplished anything significant in this world began before they felt fully equipped, before they had all the answers, before the conditions were perfect. They began anyway. They fought anyway. And the fighting itself forged them into the person capable of winning. So the first thing I want you to take home tonight is this: stop waiting for perfect conditions. Perfect conditions are a fantasy. Life doesn't offer perfect conditions. Life offers conditions. And what you do with those conditions, That is your character on display. That is your philosophy in action. That is you either choosing to keep fighting or choosing to wait for a permission slip from the universe that is never going to arrive. Now let me talk about one of the most dangerous enemies of the fighting spirit, and that enemy is comfort. Now don't misunderstand me. I am not against comfort. There is nothing wrong with enjoying the fruits of your labor. There is nothing wrong with a warm house, a good meal, a peaceful evening. I've enjoyed all of those things. But the danger is when comfort becomes a destination rather than a rest stop. When the small measure of ease you've achieved becomes the ceiling of your ambition rather than the floor. When you stop fighting because things aren't quite bad enough to demand the fight anymore. You see, desperation is actually an excellent motivator. When things are truly terrible, when you're backed into a corner, when the wolves are at the door, most people find a tremendous amount of energy they didn't know they had. The problem isn't usually the bottom, the problem is the middle. The comfortable, adequate, not quite what I dreamed of, but tolerable middle. That is where the fighting spirit goes to die. That is where more dreams have been abandoned than in any moment of crisis or catastrophe. The crisis forces you to fight. The comfort invites you to stop. And millions of people have accepted that invitation without even realizing it, without even having the conscious thought, I am giving up. They simply get comfortable, they get distracted, they get busy, and years later they look around and wonder what happened to the burning ambition they once carried. What happened is they stopped fighting, not dramatically, not in one decisive moment of surrender. They stopped incrementally, day by day, choice by choice, compromise by compromise, until the distance between who they are and who they intended to become is so vast that it feels like it belongs to a different person in a different lifetime. Don't let that be you. Please, don't let that be you. Now, there's another enemy I want to address tonight, and it is perhaps even more insidious than comfort, because it disguises itself as wisdom. It disguises itself as maturity. It wears very respectable clothing, and that enemy is the reasonable person. The reasonable person in your life, and sometimes it's a family member, sometimes it's a colleague, sometimes it's the voice inside your own head who looks at your dream and says, now let's be realistic. Let's be realistic. Have you ever heard those three words in response to your ambition? Of course you have. We all have. And there's something about those words that carries tremendous social authority, because nobody wants to be accused of being unrealistic. Nobody wants to be labeled a fantasist or a dreamer in the pejorative sense of the word. And so we bow to that reasonable voice. We scale back the vision. We lower the standard. We settle for the reasonable version of our life instead of the remarkable version. But here's what I want you to consider tonight. Every extraordinary thing that exists in this world, every invention, every institution, every movement, every masterpiece was once considered unrealistic by the reasonable people of its time. The reasonable people didn't build the extraordinary world. The unreasonable ones did. The ones who refused to let the consensus of mediocrity set the boundaries of their ambition. The ones who heard, let's be realistic, and responded with, let's keep fighting. Now, I'm not advocating for recklessness. I am not telling you to ignore facts, disregard evidence, or proceed without a plan. What I am telling you is that the plan should serve the vision, not replace it. The strategy should honor the dream, not diminish it. You can be disciplined and practical in your approach while being absolutely audacious in your destination. Those two things are not in conflict with each other. In fact, the greatest achievers I have ever studied and known in my lifetime were both rigorously disciplined in their daily habits and utterly unreasonable in the size of their aspirations. So keep fighting for the big thing. Keep fighting for the life you actually want, not the life that seems appropriate for someone from your background, not the life that your circumstances seem to suggest is the most you can hope for. The life that calls to something deep inside you, that quickens your pulse when you think about it, that makes you both excited and terrified simultaneously. That is the life worth fighting for, and that is the life that requires you to show up day after day after day and be willing to do what needs to be done even when you don't feel like doing it. Let me say something about feelings, because I think this is important. In our culture, we have developed a very dangerous relationship with our own feelings. We have started to treat feelings as facts, as reliable guides to behavior, as the ultimate arbiter of what we should or should not do. And so people say, I don't feel motivated today, or I don't feel inspired, or I don't feel ready. And then they use those feelings as valid justification for inaction, as though the feeling of motivation is a prerequisite for the act of working, as though inspiration needs to arrive before creation can begin. But let me tell you how the great ones actually operate. They work whether they feel like it or not. They show up whether they're inspired or not. They fight whether they feel brave or not. And here is the miracle. The feeling follows the action. You don't feel motivated and then start working. You start working and then motivation finds you. You don't feel brave and then begin the fight. You begin the fight and bravery shows up like a late but loyal companion. The feeling you're waiting for is on the other side of the action, not on this side of it. And every day you wait to feel ready before you begin, you are postponing the very feeling you're looking for. So stop waiting to feel like fighting. Start fighting and watch how quickly the warrior inside you wakes up. Now let's talk about the role of time, because I think this is where many people lose their courage. They start a worthy endeavor with genuine enthusiasm, genuine discipline, genuine commitment, and then time passes, and the results haven't appeared yet. And the gap between effort and reward starts to feel too wide, and they begin to wonder if maybe they were wrong. Maybe this particular dream was not meant for them. Maybe they started too late. Maybe the universe is sending them a message through the silence of their results. Let me address that directly. Results take time. Not because the universe is punishing you or ignoring you, but because growth is a process and processes have timelines that are not negotiable through impatience. An oak tree cannot be rushed. A harvest cannot be accelerated beyond the pace of the season. A skill cannot be compressed into a weekend regardless of how intense the weekend is. There are no shortcuts through the territory of genuine mastery. And the people who understand that, who make peace with the timeline without abandoning the destination, those are the ones who eventually arrive. Every farmer knows this. You plant in spring, you tend through summer, you harvest in autumn. Nobody ever planted seeds on Monday and expected a crop on Thursday. And yet people start businesses, begin relationships, launch creative careers, begin fitness journeys, and abandon them after 2 months because the harvest hasn't arrived yet. 2 months into a 20-year journey, they declare the journey a failure. And that, my friends, is not a failure of circumstances. That is a failure of philosophy. It is a fundamental misunderstanding of how the world works. The world rewards consistency, not intensity followed by abandonment, not brilliant starts followed by quiet surrenders. Consistency, the daily, unspectacular, often inconvenient commitment to doing what needs to be done again and again through all of the seasons of your effort until the harvest arrives. That is the fighting spirit expressed in its purest form, not the dramatic battle cry, not the inspirational moment, the quiet, stubborn, unwavering refusal to stop before the work is complete. And I want to spend a moment talking about the people around you, because the company you keep has a profound impact on your willingness to keep fighting. Now, this is not a comfortable thing to discuss. It requires a kind of honest assessment of your relationships that can feel unkind or disloyal. But let me put it to you this way. Your associations either strengthen your resolve or erode it. There is no neutral. Every person in your inner circle is either adding to your fighting spirit or subtracting from it. And you have a responsibility not to be ruthless or cold or dismissive of people who struggle, but to be thoughtful about how much access you give to people whose philosophy would diminish your ambition. There's a concept I have used for decades called the law of association. You become the combined average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Their attitudes become your attitudes. Their expectations become your expectations. Their level of ambition shapes your level of ambition. If you spend the majority of your time around people who have made peace with mediocrity, who have accepted less than they could have been, who view dreaming as naive and ambition as arrogance, it is extraordinarily difficult to maintain the fighting spirit in that environment. Not impossible, but extraordinarily difficult. Seek out the fighters. Find the people who are still reaching, still growing, still willing to risk discomfort for the sake of a bigger life. Spend time with people who make you want to be more than you are, who ask you questions that expand your thinking rather than confirm your limits, who challenge you, not out of competition, but out of genuine belief that you are capable of more. Those are the people who fuel the fight, and if you can't find them in your immediate circle, find them in books, in recordings, in the writings of those who have walked the path before you. The mentor doesn't have to be present in the room to influence your philosophy. Speaking of books, I want to say something that I have said many times in many places and will continue to say until my last breath. Read, please, read. The person who does not read has no advantage over the person who cannot. Your education did not end with your last day of formal schooling. Your education never ends, or at least it shouldn't. The greatest leaders, the greatest achievers, the greatest fighters I have ever known were invariably voracious readers, perpetual students, people who understood that every book is a compressed life experience, a shortcut through someone else's 10 years of trial and error, a map through territory someone else already navigated. Why would you not want that? The knowledge to keep fighting effectively is available. The strategies for maintaining discipline are available. The philosophies of people who overcame greater obstacles than yours are available in print, waiting for you to open the cover and begin. And yet the average person reads less than one book per year. Less than one. And then they wonder why their mind keeps offering them the same limited set of solutions to every new set of problems. Your mind will only serve up what you put into it. Feed it poverty thinking, and it will generate poverty solutions. Feed it the accumulated wisdom of the greatest minds in human history, and it will begin to generate possibilities you cannot currently imagine. Now let me address something that I know is sitting in the room tonight, sitting in the hearts of some of you, and that is the weight of past failure. Because some of you have fought before. Some of you have given everything you had to a dream, a business, a relationship, a goal, and it didn't work. And you got back up and you tried again, and it still didn't work. And perhaps you tried a third time. And the pain of those repeated disappointments has accumulated into something that feels like a verdict, as though the universe has reviewed your case and determined through its repeated silence that success is simply not something that is going to be granted to you. I want to speak very carefully and very directly about this because it is one of the most important things I know. Failure is not a verdict. Failure is data. Failure is the world's feedback system, delivering information about what doesn't work so you can adjust your approach and try again. Every failure contains within it, if you look carefully enough, the seeds of the next attempt's improvement. The question is never whether you failed. The question is what you extracted from the failure, what you learned, what you adjusted, how you applied that knowledge to the next attempt. Thomas Edison, and I know you've heard this before, but hear it fresh tonight. Edison failed thousands of times in his attempt to develop the incandescent light bulb. Thousands. And when a reporter asked him how it felt to fail that many times, he said something extraordinary. He said he hadn't failed that many times, he had simply found that many ways that didn't work. And each discovery narrowed the field of remaining possibilities until the one that did work was all that was left. That is not the philosophy of a man who treats failure as a verdict. That is the philosophy of a man who treats failure as a compass. And that compass, followed faithfully and consistently, eventually led him to one of the most transformative inventions in human history. You are not Edison, and your goal is not the light bulb, but the principle is identical. Your failures are not verdicts, they are compasses, and every single one of them, if you study them with honest eyes and a learning spirit, will point you slightly more accurately toward the thing that will eventually work. The fighter doesn't emerge from failure unchanged and undirected. The fighter emerges from failure wiser, more precise, more capable, and more determined than before. And then the fighter fights again. I want to talk now about courage because it is impossible to discuss the fighting spirit without addressing what actually fuels it. And courage is misunderstood. Most people think of courage as the absence of fear, as though the brave person feels no fear while the coward is paralyzed by it. But that is not accurate. Every brave person I have ever known or studied was afraid. Courage is not the elimination of fear. It is the decision that something else matters more than the fear. It is the determination to proceed in spite of the fear, to act in the presence of it, to refuse to allow it veto power over your choices. Fear is natural. Fear is intelligent. Fear is your nervous system doing its job, alerting you to risk, preparing you for challenge, mobilizing your resources for effort. The problem is not fear itself. It's when we mistake the alert for the answer. When we interpret the feeling of fear as a signal to stop rather than a signal that we are approaching something that matters. Because I will tell you this, you will rarely feel fear about things that don't matter. Fear shows up at the edge of growth, at the boundary of your current comfort zone, at the threshold of the next version of your life. And so in a strange and beautiful way, fear is actually pointing you toward exactly where you need to go. The things that frighten you are often the things that will transform you if you pursue them. So the next time fear arrives, and it will arrive, I want you to have a different conversation with it. Instead of, I'm afraid, therefore I should stop, try this. I'm afraid, which tells me this matters. I'm afraid, which tells me I'm approaching something significant. I'm afraid, and I'm going to move forward anyway. That is the internal script of the fighter. Not fearless, courageous, not the absence of doubt, the decision to act in spite of it. Now let me tell you something about the long road, because most worthy destinations are at the end of a long road. And the long road has a particular challenge that the short road does not, which is that on the long road you will have extended periods where nothing seems to be happening, where you are doing all the right things, putting in all the right effort, maintaining all the right disciplines, and you cannot see any evidence that it's working. You cannot see the progress. The scoreboard looks the same as it did 6 months ago. And in those periods, the quiet, subtle temptation to quit is at its most powerful. Because at least if things were obviously falling apart, you would have a clear reason to change course. But when things are simply plateaued, when the progress has gone underground, when the growth is happening beneath the surface where you can't see it yet, that is the most psychologically challenging terrain on the entire journey. And I want to prepare you for it because it is coming if you are genuinely pursuing something significant. It is part of the landscape of every worthwhile endeavor. In those periods, you must fight for your belief in the process. You must fight for your conviction that the laws of sowing and reaping are still operating even when the evidence is invisible. Because here is what I know. Growth is rarely linear. Progress doesn't typically arrive in a smooth, steady, observable upward curve. It tends to arrive in bursts, in breakthroughs, after long periods of what appears from the outside to be stagnation, but is actually preparation. The tree grows invisible roots for years before anyone can see how tall the trunk has become. And the person who stops watering the tree because they can't see the roots growing will never witness the height the tree would have achieved. Water the tree, do the work, trust the process, and keep fighting through the invisible seasons. Let me also speak to you about the connection between fighting and meaning, because I think this is something that is often overlooked in conversations about success and achievement. We talk about goals and strategies and disciplines and habits, and all of those things are essential. But underneath all of them, sustaining all of them, providing the fuel that makes all of them possible, is the question of meaning. Why are you fighting? Not just what are you fighting for, but why does it matter? Why does it matter to you at the deepest level, beyond the surface answer of money or status or recognition? Because let me tell you, money is a terrible reason to keep fighting when the fight gets hard enough. Status is a terrible reason. Recognition is a terrible reason. These things are nice, and I'm not dismissing them, but they are insufficient fuel for the long journey. The people who go the distance, who fight through years and decades of challenge and setback and doubt, are fighting for something that touches their sense of purpose. They are fighting because the achievement of this goal will make them more of who they are called to be. They are fighting because the work itself has meaning that transcends the compensation. They are fighting because they can see, even through the difficulty, that the person they are becoming in the process of fighting is someone worth becoming. That is what sustains the fighting spirit when nothing else can. A profound, personal, authentic connection to why this matters. Not why it should matter, not why it impresses others, why it matters to you in the quiet of your own soul when no one is watching. Find your why. Protect your why. Return to your why regularly and let it remind you on the hard days that the hard days are part of the price of something you genuinely care about. And anything you genuinely care about is worth paying that price. Now I want to shift the conversation slightly and talk about what fighting looks like in practical terms day to day, because I think sometimes we romanticize the struggle in a way that makes it seem more dramatic than it actually is. The daily fight is not usually dramatic. It doesn't usually look like a climactic scene in a movie. The daily fight looks like this. It's 6 o'clock in the morning and you don't want to get up, and you get up anyway. It's a project that isn't working, and instead of walking away, you sit back down and try again from a different angle. It's a conversation you've been avoiding, and you have it. It's the healthy choice when the easy choice is right there in front of you. It's the hour of work you don't want to do at the end of a day when you're already tired. That is what fighting actually looks like. Unglamorous, unremarkable to everyone else, but compounding quietly over time into a life of remarkable distinction. Because the gap between people who achieve great things and people who don't is rarely talent. Talent is more evenly distributed than we like to admit. The gap is almost always in the daily disciplines, the small choices made consistently over long periods of time. The willingness to fight the daily battles that nobody will ever see and nobody will ever applaud, because you understand that those invisible battles are the ones that actually determine the outcome of the visible ones. Show me someone's daily routine and I will show you their future. Show me what they do in the unscheduled hours, the early morning hours, the quiet evening hours when no one is observing and no one is evaluating. And I will show you exactly where their life is headed. Because the daily habits are the autobiography of your philosophy. They tell the story of what you actually believe, as opposed to what you say you believe. And the person who says they believe in their dream but whose daily habits are inconsistent with the pursuit of that dream, that person's habits are the truth and their words are the fiction. Make sure your habits are telling the right story. Make sure that if someone followed you through an entire ordinary day, they would see in the texture of your choices evidence of the fight, evidence of the discipline, evidence of someone who means it, who isn't just inspired on weekends when the speaker is good and the music is right, but who shows up Monday through Friday in the grind of ordinary life and does what needs to be done. Let me talk now about another dimension of this fight, and that is the fight for your relationships, because fighting for a bigger life is not something you do in isolation. You do it in the context of relationships, family, friendships, partnerships, communities. And those relationships require their own kind of fighting. Fighting for communication when silence would be easier. Fighting for honesty when a comfortable lie would smooth things over. Fighting for presence when distraction is always available. Fighting for the long-term health of a relationship when the short-term friction makes distance feel more appealing. The people who matter to you, your spouse, your children, your closest friends, they deserve your fighting spirit too. They deserve the version of you that doesn't take the easy path. They deserve the parent who shows up consistently rather than brilliantly on occasion. The partner who does the unglamorous work of maintenance and repair rather than waiting for the relationship to become so broken that the crisis forces action. The friend who tells you the truth when the truth is uncomfortable to deliver. Love is not passive. Love is not the absence of effort. Love is, in fact, one of the most demanding fights of all, and one of the most worthwhile. The families that thrive, the marriages that endure and deepen, the friendships that last decades, they are all the product of people who chose to keep fighting for each other when it would have been easier to let it go. That is the fighting spirit applied to the most important arena of all. Now let me speak to the young people, because if there is someone here tonight who is in their 20s, in that beautiful and terrifying season of life where everything is still wide open and nothing has been settled yet, I want to speak specifically to you. You are in the greatest advantage position of your entire life, and you may not fully appreciate that yet. You have time, you have energy, you have the luxury of starting something, failing, learning, adjusting, and trying again, multiple times, and still arriving at your destination with years to spare. Do not waste this season. Do not spend these irreplaceable years in unconscious entertainment, in comfortable drifting, in postponing the real work, because there is still time later. There is never as much later as you think there is. The years accelerate. I promise you that from the experience of someone who has watched them go by. What feels infinite at 25 will feel impossibly compressed at 45, and the person who starts fighting at 25 with purpose and intention will arrive at 45 somewhere magnificent. The person who starts fighting at 45 will arrive somewhere meaningful too, but they will always carry the quiet awareness of what might have been if they had begun sooner. Start now. Start today. Start with what you have, where you are, knowing what you know right now, which will never be as complete as you'd like before you begin. That's fine. That's normal. That's how it works for everyone. Start anyway. The knowledge expands in motion. The clarity comes through action. The path reveals itself to the person who is actually walking, not to the person standing at the trailhead waiting for a complete map, and to the person who is not so young, to the person who is in their 40s or 50s or even 60s, who is listening to this and feeling the ache of roads not taken, of dreams deferred, of years passed in a way that didn't honor the fullness of their potential. I want to speak to you directly too. It is not too late. I know you've heard that before. I know it can sound like a comforting platitude, but I want to say it to you not as a platitude, but as a fact of human experience. The human spirit does not have a retirement age. The capacity to grow, to change, to learn, to fight for something better, that capacity does not expire. History is full of people who began their most significant contributions later in life, who found their purpose in their second act, who discovered what they were meant to do and be after the traditional timeline suggested they should have already figured it out. You are not behind schedule. You are on your own schedule, and your schedule is not yet complete. But you must decide to fight for it. You must decide today, not tomorrow, not when things are a little more stable or when the children have grown or when retirement is funded. Today, to begin moving toward the life that still calls to you. Because the alternative, settling permanently, making peace with the gap between who you are and who you could have been, that is a particular kind of grief that compounds with every passing year. And you deserve better than that. The people who love you deserve the full version of you, the fighting version, the version that is still reaching for something. There's one more thing I want to address before I bring this evening's conversation to its conclusion, and that is the community of the fight, because there is a lie that runs through our culture about success and achievement, and that lie is that it is fundamentally a solo endeavor, that the truly strong person needs no one, depends on nothing outside themselves, rises through pure individual determination, divorced from any form of assistance or community. That is not only false, it is destructive. It keeps people from seeking the help they need. It keeps people from acknowledging the contributions of others, and it keeps people isolated in their struggles when connection would give them the strength to continue. The greatest fighters in any field, the greatest athletes, the greatest entrepreneurs, the greatest artists, all had coaches, mentors, teammates, supporters. All were influenced by others who came before. All leaned on communities of practice and encouragement and accountability. The fighting spirit is not diminished by asking for help. It is not weakened by acknowledging that you cannot do everything alone. In fact, the willingness to seek the right support, to place yourself in environments where your growth is accelerated, to accept guidance from those who have walked further down the road, that is itself an act of intelligent fighting. That is you taking the fight seriously enough to give yourself every possible advantage. Find your people. Build your community. Create your circle of accountability and mutual encouragement. Find someone who will celebrate your victories without jealousy and challenge your excuses without cruelty. Find someone who will tell you the truth when you need to hear it and remind you of your potential when you've temporarily forgotten it. Those relationships are not a luxury. They are a weapon in the fight. They are fuel when your own tank runs dry. And let me say this, be that person for someone else too. One of the most powerful things you can do for your own fighting spirit is to invest it in someone else's battle, mentoring, encouraging, supporting, believing in another person who is in the middle of their own struggle. That act of outward investment has a remarkable way of returning to you multiplied. You cannot genuinely champion someone else's growth without being reminded of the principles that govern your own. You cannot speak courage into someone else's fear without hearing those words echo back into your own heart. Give your fighting spirit away and watch how quickly it replenishes itself. Now let me bring everything together because I want to leave you tonight not with a vague feeling of inspiration, but with a philosophy you can actually carry, a framework you can return to on the ordinary days and the brutal days and every day in between. Here's what I want you to remember. Fighting is a choice, the most fundamental choice available to a human being. Every morning you will face it. Every morning circumstances will present their case for why you should do less than your best. Settle for what exists rather than reach for what's possible. Preserve your comfort rather than risk your comfort for the sake of your growth. And every morning you will have to choose. Not dramatically, not with a speech, not with an audience. Just you and the choice and the day that stretches out before you, waiting to be filled with either intention or inertia. The accumulation of those daily choices is your life, not the big dramatic moments, though those matter too. The small daily choices, the mornings when nobody is watching, the afternoons when the work is tedious and the progress is invisible, the evenings when the easier path is right there, accessible and familiar and tempting. In those moments, that is where your life is actually built. That is where the fight is actually won or lost. And what I want you to understand with the full weight of everything I've seen and experienced and studied in my lifetime is that the fight is worth it. Not because success is guaranteed. Nothing is guaranteed. Not because the road will be smooth or the timeline will be convenient or the outcome will look exactly like what you imagined. None of those things are guaranteed. But the fight is worth it because of what it does to you, because of who you become in the process of refusing to quit, because of the character that is forged in the struggle, the wisdom earned through the difficulty, the depth of satisfaction that comes from arriving somewhere having paid the full price of the journey. The person who fights and loses is immeasurably better off than the person who never fights at all, because the one who fought knows something the other one doesn't. They know their own courage. They know their own capacity. They know the particular texture of their own determination. And that knowledge, that deep bone-level self-knowledge, is something that cannot be given to you, cannot be purchased, cannot be inherited. It can only be earned on the battlefield of your own honest effort. So I leave you tonight with this, not just as a thought, but as a commitment I am asking you to make to yourself in the quiet of your own conviction, in whatever sacred space you hold inside. Keep on fighting, not just tonight when the words are fresh and the feeling is strong, not just this week when the inspiration carries you forward with unusual ease, but next month when it's harder, and 6 months from now when the progress still isn't visible, and a year from now when some of the people around you have already stopped and they're looking at you with that polite, puzzled expression wondering why you're still at it. Keep fighting because the life you're capable of is worth the price of the fight. Keep fighting because there are people in your world, your children, your students, your colleagues, the people who are watching you right now, even if you don't know it, who need to see what keeping on looks like. Who need a living demonstration that it's possible to absorb the blows and keep moving forward? Who need to inherit the philosophy of persistence from someone who actually lived it, not just preached it? Keep fighting because the alternative and the quiet surrender to what is rather than the active pursuit of what could be, that alternative costs more than any battle ever will. The price of fighting is effort and discomfort and uncertainty. The price of not fighting is the life unlived, and between those two prices there is no comparison. You came into this world with something to offer it, something specific to you, something something that the world will be slightly lesser for never having received. And the act of fighting your way to your full potential is not a selfish act. It is a generous one, because when you become everything you're capable of being, the world benefits. The people around you benefit. The people who come after you benefit. Your potential is not just yours. It's a gift you carry on behalf of everyone your life will touch. So stand up, square your shoulders, lift your eyes to the horizon of everything you still believe is possible, and begin again with full knowledge of how hard it is, with complete understanding of the price, with eyes open to the difficulty and the uncertainty and the length of the road, and choose deliberately, consciously, with everything you are, to keep on fighting, because that is who you are, that is who you were made to be, and that is the only decision in a life full of decisions that you will never regret. Thank you.